Welcome to another edition of The Narrow Mind, Tuesday, July 3rd, 2007, show 825, Why Postmillennialism and Theonomy Fail.
You're traveling through another dimension, a dimension not only of sight and of sound, but of mind. A journey into a wondrous land whose boundaries are that of the imagination. There's a signpost up ahead. Your next stop, The Narrow Mind.
Another beautiful day in Southern California. Not a cloud in the sky. I have with me in studio again my friend Jonathon Gundry, who's here visiting me from Florida. Jonathan's been staying with me since last Friday, right?
Correct.
Last Friday morning. And so we spent the weekend together, and I've had him on the program, and he's going to be on the program with me again tonight discussing why postmillennialism and theonomy fail. We're going to be talking about covenant theology and the republication of the covenant of works. But before we do that, I just want to make a few preliminary announcements. First of all, I'd like to let you know, thanks to our Narrow Mind addictions, our faithful listeners, we had 15,577 downloads on 18 shows during the month of June. And so this is the first show that we've done during the month of July. I always like to give out the stats so we kind of know how we're doing. But that's actually an average of 865 downloads on the podcast per show. And unlike a lot of other ministries, we don't keep the podcast archive full. We actually keep a limited amount of shows in the podcast archive. Like right now, for example, in the free podcast archive, you'd only find maybe 5 or 6 programs. And so, according to my estimation, we're doing exceptionally well. And I'd like to thank our listeners. I'd like to thank you for your dedication to the program and the fact that you keep coming back to listen. And hopefully, I'm looking forward to meeting some of you. I've been talking about my trip to Dallas. And I've actually had to change the dates concerning my trip to Dallas because originally I was going to drive out in July, and that has changed because my father was going to be traveling with me. He's having some problems with his leg, so he doesn't think he can sit in the car for 2 days. And so we've changed our plans. We're actually going to fly to Dallas, and we're going to be there in August 21st and 22nd. So what I'd like to do, and I've been talking about this a little bit over the last few weeks, I'd like to coordinate something in Dallas with our listeners from Dallas. I know we've got a lot of listeners in that area, probably more so than other cities, at least according to the response that I've been receiving through email and phone calls. And so what we'd like to do is have a get-together. So if you think that your church might be willing to sponsor something like that, I believe, if I remember correctly, that's a Friday and Saturday night. So if we could maybe use a room that would hold maybe 50 to 100 people, I don't expect that we would get much more than that, if we even got that, in Dallas. So if your church can accommodate something like that, and your church would be willing to accommodate something like that, I'd kind of like to get together and do a little bit of teaching, maybe a Q&A session with our audience so we could get to know each other face to face. That'll be August 21st and 22nd. I've already had one couple from Fort Worth actually offer to allow me to stay at their home, and so I've got that taken care of. But what I really want to do is get something set up. I want to contact a couple of the radio stations in Dallas. I've got some connections there, and I want to see if they'll help me plug this so that we can get a good turnout for our Dallas-Fort Worth audience. Maybe even get some new listeners out of it. Wouldn't that be great? I also want to let you know that our good friend Tony Casparo, our web designer, is currently working on a new website for UnchainedRadio.com. It looks beautiful. It is much, 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 in my opinion, more attractive and easier to use. And so, for example, there's a search field on the website, and just to give you a couple of features, let's say that you're interested in a particular topic. Let's say that you're interested in covenant theology. So you type in covenant theology. Every single Narrow Mind episode that we've ever done comes up. All right, maybe that seems kind of basic. Well, we haven't had that feature on our website presently. So that's a big plus for us. It's going to be easier to refer people to certain shows, topics, etc. In addition to that, there's also, you know how you have to refresh the page once the broadcast stream comes up? Well, he set it up now so that when the the broadcast feed begins, there's actually a flash program at the top of the website that is blinking with an on-air sign that catches your attention. Those are just a couple of the features. So I'm really excited about this website. I'm really excited that Tony Casparo has graciously offered his time and his talents and contributed that to the Narrow Mind radio program. Without him, who knows where we'd be. We'd probably still be getting 300 downloads a month. So I'm very, very thankful for him. And also, I can't forget about Christian Pelzarski, who is the guy that put together our whole podcast system. And so the podcast has really revolutionized the way our listening audience listens to the show. If you don't know how to subscribe to the podcast, or you don't know what a podcast is, it's real easy to subscribe. Just do a search on Google. How do I subscribe to a podcast? And by the way, that brings about another feature, or brings to mind another feature on the new website, frequently asked questions. So we'll have all these things available at your fingertips. But once you subscribe to the webcast or the podcast, the Narrow Mind program will be automatically delivered to your computer every time you open up your media player. So it makes it real easy. You don't have to go out to the website. You don't have to go download. It's done automatically as soon as you open up your media player. In fact, I would recommend iTunes. I think iTunes is the best, in my opinion. All right. So also we have in the month of August, the August debate series. I just realized something. I need to check those airline. I need to check those airline reservations. I think we'll be okay. We're probably not leaving until Monday. So I'm thinking out loud in case you're wondering what's going on right now. We've got 2 debates coming up in the month of August. We've got August 5th, the debate that's going to take place here in Murrieta, California. That's a Sunday evening, and that is going to be with Steve Shawnee. Steve Shawnee is an atheist. He graduated from Fuller Theological Seminary, and so he's an apostate. He is somebody who's fallen away from the faith. And then on August 19th, I'm going to be debating none other than Paul Manata. We're going to be debating the subject of infant baptism. Who are the proper recipients of Christian baptism? So the debate promo, I'm not going to play it today because we played it a couple times over the last couple of weeks. The debate promo can actually be found at the Narrow Mind Aftermath blog. How do you get there? Just click on the icon that has the woman looking through the keyhole, and you'll see the debate promo. It's a lot of fun. You can listen to that, and I'm sure that you'll get a kick out of that if you have a sense of humor. We've also got the chat room open. Nikki is our administrator tonight, and so if you would like to participate in online live chat during the course of the program, we invite you to do that. We've got a few Christians gathering together now, and all you have to do is click on that link there above the on-air sign, and that'll take you right over to the chat. If you have a question, we're not going to take any phone calls tonight because we've got a lot of material to cover. But if you have a question, you can submit it to Nikki. If she deems it as worthy of our time, and I'm giving her the privilege to filter out and to screen the questions, then she'll pass it on to me by way of private message, and then I'll try to get to it before the show's over. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the subject tonight. I started out at the beginning of the show, and I said that we're going to talk about why postmillennialism and theonomy fail from a covenant theology perspective. Now, you have to understand that there are different understandings of what covenant theology is. And so it depends on your particular understanding of what covenant theology is. But we're going to be working from a particular model that we're going to be explaining that I think, in my opinion, actually answers the hard questions and makes the most sense. In fact, Jonathan, you and I were talking today, and I said I always thought it was curious that the majority of Christians repel from the idea that we should stone adulterers and homosexuals. Mm-hmm. You'd think that if this was really God's will for the church, that it was God's will for the church to bring about a society that was modeled after Israel, mm-hmm. with all of its laws and penal sanctions, mm-hmm. you would think that this would be a conviction among the majority of Christians. I mean, we have the conviction, I think, among the majority of Christians that the 66 books of the Bible. We have the conviction that we have the triune God. We also have convictions on secondary issues, such as the day of worship. We have the conviction that we should worship on Sundays, that there should be pastors in a local church. So even though we disagree and we have different denominations and doctrinal statements on many issues, the overwhelming majority of Christians, I think, agree on these things. But for some reason, and it's not just that we don't agree that theonomy should be, I mean, that's really a poor logical argument against theonomy. So I'm not trying to say that that's my argument. Yeah. I'm simply making an observation.
Yes, it's a good observation.
But it's one thing to reject it. It's another thing to be repulsed by it. Mm-hmm. And so I always thought that was curious, as well as the Sabbath. I mean, you and I, neither of us are Sabbatarians.
Amen, brother.
And yet, the Sabbath, to say now that the Sabbath is either on Saturday, as some Seventh-day Adventists do, or the Sabbath has been changed to Sunday and now is binding in the same sense as it was in Israel. That's never been the overwhelming majority of the church, as far as I know. And especially in our day, it's not something that is even accepted readily. Mm-hmm. And I think part of the reason is because the Lord has put the conviction in the hearts of His people that there's something about Sabbath keeping and the penal sanctions of the law given to Israel that is unique to Israel. Mm-hmm. The problem is because Christians are often lazy, and because there's a lot of false systems out there floating around, and even pastors are lazy, we don't take time to try to understand the relationship between these concepts and between these laws and issues that we find throughout the Bible. Mm-hmm. So what we're going to try to do, we're going to attempt in the 45 minutes that we have left, we're going to try to attempt to bring some clarity to this issue. Now, I've asked Jonathan to, as we've been discussing this, I had Jonathan actually write out a chart, and this is going to be kind of a unique show. This isn't Covenant Theology Thursday, but however, we're going to kind of do more of an overview of what covenant theology is and why we believe that if you understand this particular model of covenant theology, you won't be prone to the errors such as
theonomy, Sabbatarianism, postmillennialism,
federal visionism.
A lot of isms being mentioned here. Isms,
right.
You save yourself from a lot of isms, shall we say.
And we always like to do that.
Yes. Yeah, you have to limit your isms in your life.
That's
you really
right.
do.
Yeah, otherwise you'll just, you'll just be fanatical.
Yes.
And unbiblical.
Yes.
So we're going to talk about that. So what we're going to try to do actually is, I told Jonathan, I said, what we really need to do is we need to produce this chart that you've drawn here. And this isn't an original chart by any means. This is something that's been gleaned from other great teachers throughout church history. But what we need to do is we need to print this chart in put it in the form of a graphic, so that it can be accessed by our listeners. So what we'll probably do is we'll probably throw something together in the next 24 hours. We'll throw a temporary chart together that we can put up on the website.
That'd be great.
And then what we'll do is we'll work on a permanent chart that has all the bells and whistles, different colors and
interactive, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. So so we'll throw something together for you so you can kind of get a mental picture. But if you want to take notes, what you can do right to begin with is you can draw a linear line. Take out a piece of paper, draw a linear line from the left side of the paper all the way to the right-hand side of the paper with an arrow pointing to the right. And then above that line, what you can do is you can put the following abbreviations that are spaced out by, I'd say, maybe about a ½ inch. So put down CW, which stands for Covenant of Works. Then put down AC, which stands for the Adamic Covenant. Then put down, and now we're going across the paper from left to right. Then put down NC, which stands for Noahic Covenant. Then put down A little b, so we can distinguish it between Abraham and Adam. A little b C, which stands for Abrahamic Covenant. And then after that, put down MC, which stands for MC Hammer.
I hope not.
The Mosaic Covenant. And then put down, my wife is over there shaking her head saying, I knew you were going to say that. Okay, what am I going to say about DC?
Please don't say it.
Put down DC for the Davidic Covenant. And then NC for the New Covenant.
Yeah, in fact, you could put N, then small case e, just to distinguish it from the Noahic.
Okay.
So new covenant.
Okay, so that'll kind of give us a framework, a skeleton to work with. If you're like me, I do better when I have some type of visual.
Mm-hmm.
So, Jonathan, why don't you begin by setting this up for us?
Sure. Yes. As Gene just mentioned there, if you drew a line on a piece of paper from left to right, as an overarching line under the line that we've just made with all the different covenants in sequential order, that top line represents God's unchanging moral character. And in parentheses, if you will, or if you wanted to, you could even put the moral law. So to use that systematic term to help make it more readily to understand, then you might want to put in parentheses the moral law. But from my perspective, and the angle I'm taking, that line that overarches all these covenants, beginning in eternity past and into the present and into eternity future, you want to have God's unchanging moral character.
Okay, so now we're going to put another line on the paper.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say an inch above the first line that has the abbreviations.
Yes.
And we can draw that from right to left also.
Mm-hmm.
And that's God's unchanging moral character. For example, an example of a moral law of God would be, thou shalt not lie.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is impossible for God to lie.
Yes.
God tells the truth. God is truth. And so this would be just one example of God's unchanging character revealed in the moral law.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Correct.
so where do we go from here?
Yes, so now that we've got those two lines drawn up, let's look again at the first line, and specifically the covenant of works. And if you wanted to, you could put an arrow pointing down from that top line, which is again God's unchanging moral character, and draw an arrow down pointing to the covenant of works. And what I mean by that is the first covenant that was made with Adam in the garden enshrined God's moral character. And theologians throughout Reformed history, and even beyond that, and before that, recognize the first covenant in the garden with Adam as a covenant of works. And what that basically means is God placed Adam in the garden, made him the federal representative of humanity, and instructed Adam to till and keep the garden, to take dominion, and not eat of the tree of good and evil. But that is a way of summarizing the moral law of God, or the moral character of God, being placed upon Adam in way or form of covenant.
Now, when you say that Adam was in covenant with God, what kind of scriptural support would you use to support the idea that there was this covenant between God and Adam?
Well, first of all, exegetically, if you went to Hosea 6:7, it says that Israel, like Adam, broke the covenant. So we know from Hosea 6:7 that Adam was in some type of covenant. But to get the identity of that covenant, you're best off going to New Testament Revelation, and of note Romans 5, beginning at verse 12, when we have the comparison between the first Adam and the last Adam. And we see there that they were in a same covenantal relationship with their Maker. And of course, the last Adam is Jesus Christ. And this is further identified in 1 Corinthians 15, when it's speaking of the resurrection of the dead.
So, in Adam's case, it was more than the command, don't eat the fruit of that tree.
Exactly, yes. It was a covenant.
It was a covenant that if you violate the conditions of the covenant, when one of the conditions or one of the stipulations was do not eat of the fruit of that tree, you will die. The consequences of breaking the covenant will be death.
Yes.
But there's more to it than that, right? Because
very much so, yes.
Adam, being made in the image of God,
yes,
has the works of the law
upon his heart.
Upon his heart.
According to Romans 2:14 and 15.
Okay.
We read that all men from Adam have the works of the law upon the heart, the conscience bearing witness.
So although God may or may not have explicitly told Adam,
every
don't
last
lie.
Yes, every last detail.
Right. He knew in his heart, because he was the image bearer of God, and he had the works of the law written on his heart, that it would be wrong to lie.
Absolutely.
But the sin of Adam that causes the covenant to be broken is, in fact, the eating of fruit. So that seems to be the focus of
Yes.
the Bible.
The two trees serve as sacraments of the covenant. The tree of life is the promise of eternal life if Adam was to persevere in obedience or persevere in his love for his Maker. Whereas the tree of good and evil represented his disobedience. And this was brought about through the subtlety and temptation of Satan, as we should all know. However, I think it's even good to state at this point, when you look at the relationship between the first Adam and the last Adam, we see that they were under the same type of covenant, the covenant of works. So when Christ finished his work upon the cross, was buried for 3 days and rose again on the third day, and then ascended to the right hand of the Father, that was a matter of strict justice. And it's important that we understand this, that when Christ ascended into heaven, because he fulfilled the covenant of works and his perfect life and his sacrificial death upon the cross, when he ascended into heaven, it wasn't as if the Father was saying, okay then, I'll be gracious to you, you can come to heaven. It's not like Enoch. We read about Enoch in the opening chapters of Genesis, and the Lord took him because he walked with the Lord. That was on the principle of grace, as we see in a few moments. But when Christ, the last Adam, lived a perfect life and made a perfect sacrifice for sins, then when he ascended into heaven, it was a matter of strict justice. In other words, he deserved it.
He had earned that place. He had that right to dwell with God.
Exactly, because Romans 7:10 says that the law is ordained unto life. So if you keep the law perfectly, you can go to heaven. And heaven is basically the shorthand way of speaking of that eternal Sabbath rest that God presently enjoys.
So would you say that it's fitting to call that Adam, that Adamic, not the Adamic covenant, that first covenant?
Yes.
It's fitting to call that covenant the covenant of works because, although the Bible doesn't refer to it as such, because of the comparison made between Adam and Jesus being the second Adam, and us being saved by Jesus's keeping of the works of the law.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the Bible says that no man will be justified by the works of the law, but yet, as Christians, Jesus comes as our substitute.
Mm-hmm.
He keeps the law perfectly, and so in a sense, we're indirectly saved by the works of the law, but not our own works, Jesus' works of the law.
Yes, that's why we have the imputation of Christ's righteousness when we believe in the gospel.
Right. So therefore, it's fitting to call both the Mosaic covenant a covenant of works.
Yes.
And also the covenant that was made with Adam, the covenant of works.
Yes. Now, from Adam's perspective, before the fall, you could possibly think of it as the covenant of life, because the main commandment of that covenant was love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, mind, and strength. But from this post-lapsarian worldview that we have now, after the fall, it is better in the legal sense to speak of it as the covenant of works.
Okay.
And like you made reference to there, when we get to the Mosaic covenant, we'll see that the Mosaic covenant is a republication on a national typological level of that same covenant that was made with Adam in the garden. But only this time, it's with the people of Israel.
It's not with one individual.
No.
It's with a nation.
Yes.
Okay, before we go any further, before we move out of the garden, Nikki from Los Angeles asked the question, is there a difference between knowing right and wrong and having the knowledge of good and evil?
Yes, I think the knowledge of good and evil, if she means by that the tree of good and evil in the garden, there's the conscience that tells you what is right and wrong innately, and then there's the experiential right and wrong, where you actually commit the right and wrong, or you experience right and wrong.
So it's an experiential knowledge.
Yes, it's experiential knowledge. And that's what Adam experienced when he transgressed the covenant. Okay. And transgress means to cross over. He knew that he was not to eat of that tree. However, if he had remained obedient and overcame the temptation of Satan, then based upon the necessary inference from Scripture, he would have been confirmed in ethical righteousness, in other words, justified. And then it would have been a matter of his offspring fulfilling the dominion mandate prior to God granting unto humanity that eternal Sabbath rest, that everlasting Sabbath rest that God enjoyed from the creation of the world.
Okay, so we know the story.
Mm-hmm.
Adam breaks the covenant.
Mm-hmm.
He's ejected from the garden. Mm-hmm. He's cut off from the tree of life.
Mm-hmm.
And immediately God comes to Adam, calls him out of hiding, and establishes another covenant.
Yes.
On our chart here, it's represented by AC, the Adamic covenant.
Yes.
Which is the beginning of what we would call covenant of grace.
Yes, and if you wanted to, if you were still drawing this chart, you could draw a line underneath that line, underneath that middle line there, and put covenant of grace all the way across from left to right, begin with the Adamic covenant, all the way to the new covenant.
Okay, so earlier you talked about the covenant of redemption, which is the covenant that's made between the Trinitarian Godhead.
Yes, in eternity past.
Right. And now, would you agree with wording it this way, that the covenant of grace is the covenant of redemption taking place in history?
Yes.
So if you have the covenant of redemption overarching eternity, and then you could have these arrows coming down with Adam, with Noah, with Abraham. So you've got the covenant of redemption here manifesting itself as a covenant of grace in real human history in relationship to real human beings.
Yes.
Okay.
So the covenant of works and the covenant of grace is the outworking of the covenant of redemption in eternity past. Especially for Reformed people, this is quite easy to accept because we recognize that God is sovereign over all things, even over the fall of Adam. Even though it was Adam's fault, and he is 100% accountable for his transgression, it all serves the purpose of the covenant of redemption. But it is important, I think, to state at this point that not only is there a distinct difference between the covenant of works and the covenant of grace. The covenant of works is obviously on the principle of works. In other words, the servant has to fulfill the terms of the covenant, whereas the covenant of grace is based upon the covenant maker, in this case Jehovah, who says, I will do this for my people.
Okay, so in the garden you've got a two-sided covenant in that both parties have an obligation to perform.
Yes.
In the covenant of grace, it's one-sided. God comes to Adam and says, I'm going to crush the head of Satan. I'm going to give you a seed. The seed of the woman is going to be victorious. And so he makes promises that are not conditioned upon Adam's obedience, but are conditioned upon the graciousness of the one giving them.
Exactly. I mean, this is in summary, and we're looking right now at redemptive history, but that's the best way to speak of it.
Right. And you got to understand, we're to our listening audience here, we're taking kind of a jet stream.
A snapshot.
Right. We're going fast here. All of these points could well deserve much more time.
Yes.
And so we're trying to give an overview, but we're going quickly.
Yes. So we're going to miss out a few details, of course, but as long as you get the skeleton of what we're saying here, the backbone, as I like to put it, of the covenants of Scripture. So we have the covenant of redemption, eternity past, which is made between equals. The three persons of the Trinity are co-equal, co-eternal, and they mutually agree to do this to glorify themselves. The covenant of works is based upon the obedience of the servant, and the covenant of grace is based upon the faithfulness and the obedience of the covenant maker.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to continue our discussion on covenant theology and why post-millennialism and theonomy fail with a proper understanding. We'll be right back. We're glad that you joined us tonight. By the way, have you signed up for the Narrow Mind Update email group? It's very simple to do. All you have to do is click on that green mailbox that you see there on the homepage at unchainedradio.com. Send us an email and you'll automatically be subscribed. This way you'll be up to date on the weekly programming schedule. You'll find out what's going to be on tap, and that way you'll be sure not to miss something that may be of interest to you. Also, we want to encourage you, if you haven't done so already, to purchase a subscription to The Narrow Mind. For $39.99, you can get complete access to the archive at unchainedradio.com. We've got hundreds of radio programs, over 20 formal debates and teachings, and all kinds of interesting stuff. So in addition to that, if you're listening via the podcast and you're not a subscriber, you're actually listening on the low-quality podcast feed. We also provide our subscribers, our annual subscribers, with a high-quality podcast feed that allows them to listen to a version of the show that's saved at a much higher sound quality. So we encourage you to do that. We'll also send you a copy of my book, The Baptism Cult, the Expose of the International Church of Christ, for the low, low price of $39.99. And when you purchase a subscription, by the way, you help us pay our monthly bills here at UnchainedRadio.com and The Narrow Mind. All right, so we left off before the break. Adam breaks the covenant of works. God comes to him, calls him out of hiding, and establishes the covenant of grace in its first manifestation. We call this the first pronunciation or pronouncement of the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens then?
Well, after that we have the introduction of the promised seed, which would fulfill the covenant of works one day. So, according to Romans 5, we all come under the guilt of Adam because he's our federal representative.
Okay.
And as a consequence, the works of the law, because of that creation covenant, are still upon the hearts of men. So they're still fully morally obligated to keep the works of the law. But the law itself has been broken in Adam. And now we're under the curse of God because of it. This is why we need so desperately the covenant of grace. And this begins in Genesis 3:15, as you just made reference to there. And this also goes by the term the Adamic covenant.
Okay.
And that's when we read about the two genealogies from Seth and Cain after the death of Abel. After Cain slew Abel, we read that the covenant line passed from Adam to Seth. And we follow that covenant line until we get to Noah.
Okay, so then God comes to Noah
Mm-hmm.
in a very special manner,
Mm-hmm.
addresses Noah, and finds Noah actually righteous,
Mm-hmm.
as he records for us in the book of Genesis.
Yes, and I think this is also important as well. It's not righteousness in the book of Romans sense, in the sense of moral perfection, but his covenant fidelity, that he was faithful to that covenant line, that covenant community when people were apostatizing, and you can even argue from Genesis 6 with the sons of God, the Benai Elohim. I would identify that as the line of Seth intermarrying with the line of Cain. I know there's some disagreement there.
I would agree with that. I just addressed this a while back.
Yeah, but Noah was faithful within that generation, just as Enoch was.
Faithful in the sense that he didn't waver in his faith?
Yes.
Or faithful in the sense of his obedience to what God commanded?
His faithfulness produced obedience, but this has to be carefully qualified. It's not moral perfection in the sense that he was capable of obtaining salvation through his own efforts or obtaining heaven by keeping the covenant of works. That chance has been and gone in Adam. But because God is gracious, he was saving people all from the beginning of Genesis 3:15, according to the promise,
right,
which is the gospel.
Right.
They didn't have the full revelation as we have today, but the order salutis, the order of salvation, has always been the same.
Okay.
So because he was regenerate, he was faithful within that context.
All right.
And then it says the Lord found grace in Noah. And from there we read about how the earth was destroyed, the old world was destroyed by a flood. He and his family were spared. And they entered into the new world from the mountains of Ararat.
So then Adam is a type of Christ. And then Noah also becomes a type.
Yes.
By way of salvation passing from the old world into the new world.
Correct.
In fact, Peter makes that analogy for us. And then as time progresses, we find another fellow by the name of Abraham.
Who was a descendant of Shem, the son of Noah. Now again we have the covenant community found in the line of Shem. Ham was cursed because of his behavior in Genesis 10, I believe it is. No, excuse me, Genesis 9, when we read about how Noah became drunk. And we won't go into the details to exactly what was going on there, but he was excommunicated, if you will, from the covenant community. And it was through the line of Shem that Abraham came.
Now, between Noah and Abraham, God also establishes capital punishment for the crime of murder.
Yes, that's a very important point as well. That at this point, human government is introduced to the human race through the Noahic covenant, so that the dominion mandate could be fulfilled, or if not fulfilled, that humanity could populate the earth.
Okay.
So that evil could be restrained.
Okay. So we come to Abraham,
Mm-hmm.
Abraham is called out in Genesis 12.
Mm-hmm.
He is given the revelation of the seed in Genesis 15.
Mm-hmm.
How did you say that earlier today? You said you have the promise.
Genesis 12 is the covenant calling.
Okay, so he's called.
Genesis 15 is the covenant ratification.
Okay.
Genesis 17 is the sign of the covenant administration. And Genesis 22 is the covenant confirmation.
Okay, so the covenant, the sign of the covenant then is circumcision.
Yes, for the Abrahamic covenant.
And that's given in Genesis 17.
Yes.
And then the covenant, how'd you say it, ratification?
Is Genesis 15,
Okay.
when the animal sacrifices are prepared by Abraham and how God himself, in a smoking furnace, passes through the pieces of the offering.
Okay, let's talk about that treaty that God makes there with Abraham. Because normally, in suzerain treaty, normally the conquering king would take the lesser king and the vassal, and he would put certain demands on him, right? He would say, if you obey me, and if you keep these conditions of our agreement, then I will spare your life. You can live. That would be an example of a suzerain treaty. But God doesn't do that with Adam. Right. With Abraham. God comes to him and says, I'm going to make you a great nation. I'm going to multiply your seed. I'm going to give you a son. Basically tells him all these things that he's going to do.
For Abraham.
I'm going to give you a land. And he doesn't say, but Abraham, you have to do this, or you have to do this, or you have to do this. So it's really, in the simplistic definition, a one-sided covenant.
Yes.
Which would be similar to a royal grant.
Correct, yes. Very good, Gene. That's you said it perfectly. That's exactly what I was going to say, that it is like unto a royal grant. And a royal grant in those days was when a king would reward a servant with something he didn't deserve, like more land, more wives, more soldiers under his command, whatever it may be. And we even have an example of this with Saul. He said to the Benjamites in Samuel, when they were tempted to follow David, why follow David? He does not give you lands and property as I do. And this is like a royal grant. You're getting something you don't deserve.
Okay. So God comes to Abraham and establishes a covenant, or would it be more accurate to say confirms the covenant?
He confirms the covenant. He ratifies it in Genesis 15, gives the administration in Genesis 17, but in Genesis 22 it's confirmed when Abraham proves the validity of his faith by offering of Isaac upon the altar on Mount Moriah.
Now, Abraham is commanded to be circumcised by God. But this is after Abraham enters into covenant, after Abraham exercises faith. So Romans chapter 4 tells us what? That this is a
sign of Abraham's faith.
Okay, so the circumcision is a sign of Abraham's faith.
Yes.
Is there a different significance then for Abraham's children that are yet, small? Maybe they don't understand.
Yes, I think even at that point we can recognize that there's a difference between the faith that Abraham did and the covenant sign that was given to the male child born into his household. And it's important that we stress that was only the male child that was born into his household that was circumcised. But the reason they were circumcised was in order to preserve the covenant line for the coming of the promised seed, which is the last Adam, the Messiah, the one who would fulfill the covenant of works.
So the seed was coming through this. The seed was coming through the reproduction organ of Abraham and his children and his boys.
Yes, then Isaac.
Up until the time of Mary.
Yes, and then we have the fulfillment through the incarnation of Christ. He becomes the seed, and Galatians 3 identifies Christ as the promised seed.
So it's almost as if even in the sense of procreation, the very procreation that brings about the seed, being Christ, is set apart through circumcision.
Correct.
All right, you like the way I said that?
I did.
I can tell by the way your expression in your eyes.
I'm like, yes.
Okay, good. And there's also blood involved. Circumcision was something bloody, which also represented shedding of, well, I'm not sure how far you'd want to go with that, but...
Yeah, it's not propitious.
It's not propitious, but there is blood.
But it represents the cutting and the being set aside, which normally involves the spilling of blood.
Okay.
However, we're going to see right now when we look at the Mosaic covenant, the blood that was sprinkled upon the people is very different to the blood of the calves that was split when the Abrahamic covenant was made in Genesis 15.
Okay, so normally in a suzerain treaty, the conquering king would walk through. Well, he would would both parties walk through, or just the vassal, the lesser king?
The lesser king.
He would walk through. But in this case, as God splits the animals in half, sacrifices them, he doesn't have Abraham walk through. He walks through himself.
Yes.
Symbolizing that he is the one that's going to keep the stipulations of the covenant.
Yes, he's the one who's going to fulfill what he's promised to do. Hence the language, I will do this. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and give you the land of promise.
Okay.
And so on.
So then we come to Moses.
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 There's a radical shift.
Yes.
Or maybe not a radical shift, but something new is happening here.
Yes. And what takes place at this point, after they're called out of Egypt into the wilderness to worship God? Remember, in Genesis 15, it was prophesied that Abraham's people would spend 430 years in Egypt, and then they would be rescued from Egypt and then put into the promised land. But first and foremost, they came to the wilderness. And there in the wilderness, we have the Sinaitic covenant, or the Mosaic covenant. And that's when Moses went up to the top of Mount Sinai and came down with the 10 Commandments and the book of the law. And there we read in Exodus 24 that this book of the law was a different kind of covenant to that of the Abrahamic covenant, because in this example we read that when the animal sacrifices were made, the blood was not only sprinkled upon the altar and upon the book of the law, but also upon the people.
Okay.
And they agreed with God that they would keep the covenant.
They said, we're going to keep everything that you've commanded us.
Yes, it's there in Exodus 24.
And if we don't, let the cursings of this covenant be ours.
Yes.
And our children.
Yes.
And upon our children.
Yes. And that's why in Deuteronomy we have the covenant sanctions from chapters 28 to 30. And first of all, you have the blessings. If you obey me, Israel, as a nation, I will raise you up above all the other nations of the world and bless you abundantly. And we have a list of blessings that would be theirs upon obedience. But if you disobey me, then you will be cursed. And the book of Leviticus in the 26th chapter says that they will be cursed sevenfold. And the number 7 in the context of judgment is a picture of divine judgment.
Okay.
Because it's complete, it's total in nature.
So give me an example of some of the cursings that they would experience if they were disobedient.
Exile.
So they would be cast out of the land.
Yes.
They would be subject to their enemies.
Subject to their enemies. They would be impoverished.
Alienated from God.
Diseases. It even says they would be smote with madness. That God would strike them with madness and insanity. And there's a list that you can read there in Leviticus 26 and in Deuteronomy 29 and 28 that is quite horrific. But it shows you the holy nature of God. That when we agree to do something, as it was with Adam in the garden, or it was with Moses and the people in Mount Sinai and in the wilderness, then it is to be taken very seriously, because God is a holy God, and He demands perfection. Even if it's on a national level, He demanded Israel to be the perfect nation.
Okay, so when you talk about the covenant of Moses, the Mosaic covenant, being a republication of the covenant of works, what you're saying is now the model or the covenant that was given to Adam back in the garden that he broke is now republished in a very detailed manner. 613 laws, including laws that would regulate worship, laws that would regulate government, and laws that would regulate moral behavior. This is very important because now we see that this law is given in great detail. Israel says we're going to obey everything, but they don't, and so they become covenant breakers. But God isn't done with them.
Right.
Because in addition to this Mosaic covenant, as history continues to unfold, you have God coming to David.
Right, the King of Israel.
The King of Israel.
And again, we have a covenant that is like unto a royal grant. So it's more like the Abrahamic covenant. And that's when God says, I will establish your seed forever and the throne of Israel forever. And we read about this in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 14 to 16. And typologically, it was fulfilled to Solomon because he built the temple there in Jerusalem. But ultimately, again, we know that the seed is Christ. The genealogy of Matthew bears witness to this, and again, Galatians 3 identifies the seed as Christ.
Okay, so one thing that they all have in common, at least, Noah's doesn't mention, the administration given to Noah doesn't mention a seed that I'm aware of.
Not that I'm aware of either.
But Adam is promised a seed.
But it's already been promised with Adam.
That's right, so it's binding.
Yes.
Abraham is reconfirmed in promise of seed. More specifically, that Abraham is going to be the father of the seed. When Moses comes, he says that God's going to raise up a prophet like unto myself, speaking of Christ. Then we're told that this seed is going to be not only a prophet like unto Moses, but he's also going to be son of David.
A king.
A king. And he's going to sit on David's throne forever. And then something strange happens. And that is, a baby is born. And the baby is born under this covenant administration that was given to Moses.
Yeah, Galatians 4:4 says that the seed was born under the law, to redeem those who are under that law. And we are all under that law in Adam as it's broken in that first covenant of works. But in redemptive history we have the law of Moses that was condemning not only Israel but the nations. Because the book of Romans says that the whole world becomes guilty before God through the law coming to Israel.
So Jesus is born under the law, he grows up, and he keeps the law perfectly. Now, what's also interesting is you read the New Testament, for example, in Matthew, Jesus is equated with Israel. Because remember, Israel says, we're going to keep all that you've commanded. They fail in a similar manner as Adam failed. Jesus comes along, and God says, for example, in the book of Matthew, I think it's Matthew chapter 2, out of Egypt I called my son. Speaking of Jesus, not Israel. Now, the original context was calling Israel out of bondage in Egypt.
Yeah, and in Exodus 4, I believe it is, Israel is referred to as the son of God, as Adam is in Luke 3, when we have the genealogy going back to Adam. So you can see the parallel in the relationship between Adam, Israel, and Christ. They are all under a type of covenant of works, but they weren't identical to one another.
All right, so then Jesus fulfills the covenant.
Yes.
And comes to redeem those under the law by obeying all of the commands, the righteous demands set forth in the covenant of works. Now remember, Jesus saves us by the works of the law. That is, that he keeps the works of the law in our place. So now, everything has been fulfilled. The Mosaic economy has been fulfilled.
Yes.
The Abrahamic, the Noahic, the Adamic, the Davidic, everything is fulfilled in Christ. So now Christ comes and establishes the new covenant. And we see him establishing this the night of his arrest.
Yes.
Right before he goes to the cross. And how then does the Mosaic covenant find finality in the beginning of the new covenant?
Yes, good question. Well, Romans 10:4 says that Christ is the end of the law for righteousness. And the book of Hebrews in the 8th chapter speaks about how the old covenant was waxing old and ready to vanish away. And there we have the fulfillment of the prophecy of Jeremiah 31. Because in the Old Testament prophets, because they were under the condemnation of that Mosaic law, it was prophesied that the new covenant one day would be established. And when that new covenant would come, it would be different in kind to that of the Mosaic covenant. The new covenant you can't break, the Mosaic covenant you could, because it was based upon your own obedience, where the new covenant is based upon Christ's obedience. And again, we have that same language. I will put my law within their minds and within their hearts, and I will forgive their transgressions and sins.
And they will all know me from the least to the greatest.
And they will all know me to the least to the greatest. So there's a co-equal number of elect and saved persons in the final administration of the covenant of grace, which we call the new covenant.
But even back under the Mosaic covenant, there were those that were true Israel.
Yes, they were saved according to the promise, according to the Abrahamic promise, and then the Davidic promise.
So they had faith in the promised seed, just as we have faith. As we're looking back at the promised seed, they were looking forward.
Yeah. However, the law itself was an overlay of the underlying substratum of the covenant of grace. So on the chart there, you might want to put above that line going from left to right called the covenant of grace, an additional line above that from the Mosaic covenant to the new covenant. And that was that epoch of redemptive history where we had the typological kingdom of God on earth.
So that's a temporary typological kingdom that shows us what a theocratic nation looks like, a nation under God.
Yeah, and Galatians 3 says that it's a schoolmaster to bring us to Christ. But now that Christ has come, we are no longer under that schoolmaster.
Okay, so let's talk about how this is practical in according to the New Testament revelation. For example, Hebrews chapter 4 tells us, let's just talk about one aspect. Hebrews chapter 4 tells us that the Sabbath was a shadow of the things to come. That Christ has now become the Sabbath rest for God's people. So back under this Mosaic economy that begins with Moses, ends with Christ, there was a very harsh penalty for breaking the Sabbath. Now as Christ comes and he fulfills not only the law, but also becomes the Sabbath rest for the people of God, according to Hebrews 4, there is a very harsh punishment for those that are outside of Christ.
Yes, exactly.
So now the judgment for being outside of Christ is not just capital punishment, it's eternal punishment, which will be brought about on the day of judgment.
Yes.
So whereas the nation was it was a picture of a nation ruled by God and a holy people, it was imperfect, and so judgment, temporal judgment, such as capital punishment for Sabbath breakers, adulterers, homosexuals, was something that was also administered in the covenant to show the harshness of that type of sexual immorality or lawlessness among the people who had been set apart for God.
Yes, for example, in Hebrews 10, going back to Hebrews again, when it's talking about the apostate in the early church, not the new covenant breaker, but the apostate, it says, "What sort of punishment do you think you deserve, who trampled under the blood of the covenant and done despite the Spirit of grace?" It says, if in the Old Testament people were punished through the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, what sort of punishment do you think you deserve?
Right.
Yeah, I think I got those verses kind of back to front there, but you follow.
Yeah, no, I'll follow
the theology,
right,
of what I'm saying here.
And the punishment that the writer of Hebrews is pointing to is that fearful trembling of falling into the hands of an angry God, not falling into the hands of a magistrate.
Yes, and the context is eternal punishment.
That's right, the day of judgment.
The day of judgment.
So now that the Mosaic administration comes to an end, so does the typological nature of the Mosaic administration.
Correct.
So to say now that, okay, so let's tie this into theonomy and postmillennialism. Theonomy being the idea that Israel was a model for all societies for all time. So we are to, as Christians, we are to try to enact laws that reflect the laws that were given to Moses, such as stoning adulterers, stoning homosexuals, stoning rebellious children, and so on, stoning Sabbath breakers. Stoning really isn't the main point because theonomists would argue that there's other methods that can be employed. So
but the execution of those.
Execution, right. These are capital offenses.
In the Holy Land, under the Mosaic covenant, under that theocracy.
But what you're saying then is once that Mosaic economy ends, so does its typological nature. It was never intended to be a model for society.
Yeah, it's not a model for societal discipline, but it's a picture of divine judgment. So those judgments have been delayed until the last day now, to the final day of judgment. So that in this age of grace, and I don't mean to be dispensational there, but in this age of the Great Commission, shall I say, that all the elect can be saved in that context. That we're not to eclipse, if you will, common grace by introducing these state laws that are only designed for theocracies.
Right. Now, let's give an example. In the book of 1 Corinthians, Paul is addressing a situation of fornication where a man is sleeping with his stepmother, right, his father's wife. Paul basically says that we are to hand him, that the church is to hand him over. They are to put him out of the church, which is excommunication. Now, we've already seen, as we've been going through redemptive history, that excommunication was the judgment for those who were lawbreakers in the covenant community of God's people, which would be an example. Can you cite an example prior to the law of Moses?
Where there was...
Somebody was excommunicated.
Cain. And in fact, when you read the account in Genesis 4, God intentionally kept him alive. He said, if anybody avenges you, they shall be avenged sevenfold. Again, that's the picture of divine judgment.
So Cain's judgment was coming on Judgment Day.
On Judgment Day, because he wasn't under that theocracy. The theocracy had ended in the garden with the breaking of the covenant of works. They were then under the covenant of grace. But the law is really the parentheses. The Mosaic economy, I should say, is the parentheses in God's covenant plan. So we affirm the unity of the covenant of grace, but we see the uniqueness of the introduction of the law in the Mosaic economy, because it serves as a schoolmaster to point us to Christ.
So if somebody says that we should execute adulterers, and they got the moral majority together to get off their butts and go down and pass legislation, from the perspective that we've been discussing, that would be wrong.
Yes.
That would be immoral because we lack the covenantal authority that was given to Israel under the theocratic society in which Israel existed.
Exactly. In fact, if I was to have emotional impact here, that is murder. When you don't have covenantal authority to take somebody's life, that's murder. So that's how significant this discussion is.
So postmillennialism, which is the concept that the world becomes Christianized, and theonomy are two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other.
It's possible, but highly unlikely.
I mean, yeah. Because at some point, the nations become such a reflection. Right, they got to be ruled by God's law.
Yes.
So both of us here in the studio are amillennial. We don't believe that there is some type of expectation in the future of a golden age. We believe that is actually reserved for the eternal state. The Bible Jesus describes this as an evil age. Now, I've debated both of these subjects, both postmillennialism and theonomy, and I think that the major flaw in both those systems is the failure to see the typological nature of Israel. And I'd also say that it's, in the case of the Paedo-Baptists, it's also the failure to see the typological nature of circumcision. That circumcision was a sign that was given for a time. And since the Abrahamic covenant is fulfilled in Christ, well, first of all, everybody agrees that circumcision is no longer binding. But why do we think that we need to replace circumcision with water baptism?
Yes, it simply doesn't follow, especially if you have this correct theological understanding of the typological nature of Israel, because here we have a theocracy that is terminated through the coming of Christ, because Christ is now our great King, seated on the right hand of the Father, and he sends his Spirit at Pentecost to birth the New Testament church. So, if you will, in the age of the Spirit, where he's gathering in his elect people before that final day of judgment. But when Christ returns, then that judgment will take place.
All right. Can you believe our time is up? We've actually gone about 3 minutes over. So, good conversation, Jonathan. I look forward to discussing this with you in the future. Maybe we'll have some questions that'll come in on Open Phones Friday. If That'd so, maybe you can be listening from home.
Yes, maybe I can call in.
Maybe you can call in and we can tackle these together. All right. We will not be having a show tomorrow because it's July 4th. In fact, Jonathan and I are going to head down to Tijuana, Mexico, and get involved in some ministry down there and meet some pastors and eat some tacos and hopefully not stay in the borderline too long coming back. But those are our plans for tomorrow. So Lord willing, we'll be back at 3 o'clock on Thursday afternoon, West Coast time, for Covenant Theology Thursday. I think we're going to be discussing the doctrine of glorification on Thursday, if I'm not mistaken. So tune in. Until next time, may the Lord continue to bless the study of his word.